Hi, this is Arnie Arneson, and this is part 2 of the Wednesday edition of The Attitude with Arnie Arneson. Our producers Dave Scott and Stephanie Collins. You know the drill. We're recording on Tuesday morning. Once a month, we do race class with Jonathan Feingold. We usually do it on a Thursday, but because of Thanksgiving, we are going to sort of tape early. But more than ever, it's important that we do race class. And Jonathan, I just need to let you know that just yesterday, we were interviewing someone about the horrors of slavery. All right. The things that we were never taught. And one of the proudest things I said to the professor who was talking about the horrors of slavery was that how I was so excited that I met you 3 years ago, or almost 4 years ago now, and that we've been doing race class, because I feel like the more they tell me not to focus on something, the more they want to whitewash something, the more I want to learn about something. I'm still the little like 5-year-old. When your mother says no, then you've got to figure out, exactly what you need to do. But to a large extent, I think what they have done by attempting to sort of curtail discussion, by whitewashing history, by denying DEI and CRT, many of us are even pursuing it more and trying to get more of an understanding of it. And you've been helping me do this now for almost 4 years. So let me remind everyone about race class. Legislation restricting the teaching of race and racism in public schools and government entities has spread across the country. In an effort to respond, BU Law Professor Jonathan Feingold and myself are offering race class, a once-a-month course conversation where listeners can hear what it's like to approach race and racism from a place of curiosity and history rather than fear and anxiety. So let me welcome you back to the program, Mr. Feingold. And I was really glad that you were joining me this week because I saw a story that has not gotten a lot of attention. And the story was the State Department is going to identify DEI policies and mass migration as human rights infringements. Included in that are countries that are permitting things like abortion. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, what are they doing? DEI policies, abortion, that, these diversity policies are infringing on human rights. I was not only disgusted, but to some extent almost apoplectic, because I'm reading this going, what are we doing? And then what made me even more sad, Jonathan, was that nobody was talking about it. It was like just one more thing in this sort of chaos that's coming out of the administration. But at the same time, I'm really glad that you're here so that we can sort of talk about this and other issues under the guise of race class. So welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Arnie. Kind words for you to say. So let's talk about a few things today. And that article you're referencing from 4 days ago, at least one in the BBC, that is headlined, "New U.S. Rules Say Countries with Diversity Policies Are Infringing Human Rights." And, in a sense, this is, on point for an administration that is committed to undoing, undermining, dismantling all the infrastructures that exist in the United States and globally that are designed to promote more diverse, equitable, and inclusive societies. And something that I think is notable is the way in which the Trump administration, consistent with decades of right-wing movements in the United States, has co-opted the language of equality and the language of civil rights in order to undermine equality and civil rights. Because again, the claim is that these diversity policies, whether that be efforts to integrate institutions, to promote reproductive autonomy, are in fact infringing human rights. And so that's all there. And there's some other examples recently that I think are worth noting that helps to perhaps just place into sharper relief what it is the current regime in the United States is committed to, and what it means when it's attacking things like woke or quote unquote DEI. And so from about 10 days ago, there was an article that came out with the headline that's quite accurate. Trump administration removes report on missing and murdered Native Americans, comma, calling it DEI content. And so what we are
Oh, God.
seeing is, and this is meaningful against the backdrop of the country romanticizing, celebrating Thanksgiving, at the same moment that, it's very hard for many of our young people to actually get an accurate, you know, um, depiction, portrayal of, what, conquest was, in the United States, or, what is now the United States. But let's go back a little bit further. So you and I, um, almost 3 years ago, we had a conversation in which we were looking at exploring Ron DeSantis's demonization of the LGBTQ community, critical race theory, and wokeness. And at the time, there was actually litigation going on. I assume that litigation is ongoing, that was challenging one of the laws that Florida had passed designed to prevent students from learning about racism, from learning about gender identity. And oftentimes when he, on his, uh, in his stump speeches, DeSantis would, um, just rail against woke. And so during the litigation, DeSantis's general counsel, so the lawyer for the state of Florida, essentially was asked, what does woke refer to? The
I
governor
love this.
keeps saying he doesn't like this thing. What is it? And the response was, quote, the belief that there are systemic injustices in American society and the need to address them.
Mm,
And
mm.
so I think it is really important to understand that the attacks on DEI, the attacks on critical race theory, the attacks on trans kids, the attacks on woke are an attack on exposure to information and ideas that would lead students to understand that, yes, systemic injustice exists and we should address it. So that's one reason why it's concerning when Democrats backpedal and don't defend DEI wholeheartedly, don't defend woke, uh, or critical race theory, because the attack is on a public recognition, a shared sensibility that the world as it exists is unjust.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have a moral obligation to do something about it. Okay, so Arnie, now I'm going to throw a question your way.
Oh, no. Okay.
So this is race class. So,
Mhm.
sometimes, got to ask questions.
Question
So
and student. Yes, go on.
one thing that we've talked about many times is how race, racial categories, the ideas associated, with them, attached to them, are a political tool that are marshaled or are mobilized in order to serve certain purposes. And so when we think about, blackness, the, ways in which, blackness has, been constructed and all of the negative meanings associated, with it that have been, um, designed in part to justify, to legitimize racial inequality. But also when we think about the xenophobic narratives, that Trump and others marshal targeting immigrants, always in sort of racialized terms. Who is that? Who this rhetoric, the racialization of immigrants, Americans who, we would identify, uh, as black. Who is that all meant to oppress
Who is
or
that
to
meant?
enable the oppression of?
Well, when I see what you're saying, what for me, I always end up going back to class, that it almost seems to be an oppression not of race, but of class and of wealth.
Okay,
So that the
but okay, you're getting there. So say more. So all of these racist tropes about people who are racialized as black, immigrants, part of the part of the function is to enable the oppression of who? Because you're moving in the direction that I want you to go. Like if we think about who is that like the largest racial group denied SNAP benefits, just in absolute terms.
But it was
The
white.
lar
It was white poor people. I mean, in this. I mean, again. But what you are suggesting to white poor people is that the way for you to get more is to hold other people down. Like so
That's not what
they
I'm saying.
I know that no. I know that's not what you're saying. But what I'm saying is what they're suggesting is that there's someone lesser than you. So therefore, when I am denying SNAP benefits, even though you will lose your SNAP benefits and you are the majority, but here's the good news. Those blacks and Hispanics, they won't get it either. But more importantly, it's almost like a divide and conquer. By their not getting it, maybe then there'll be more for you. I always feel like it's a divide and conquer mentality, even though, as you point out, the vast majority of people who are on Medicaid, the vast majority of people who are on SNAP turn out to be white, and most of them live in MAGA states.
And so yeah, I'm saying something slightly differently,
Okay,
but not
okay,
not not all, not all that differently.
okay.
So for decades, there have been conversations about, why do economically distressed uh, Americans, white Americans, vote for the GOP, vote for MAGA, a party that is systematically through folks like Russell Vogt trying to dismantle, every system of public welfare that supports people, particularly poor people. Whether it's SNAP, whether it's skyrocketing ACA premiums, and so people are like, why do these? Why the articulation often is, why do people vote inconsistent with their self-interest? And we should take that question seriously. And so, what is it that MAGA sells? Like, why is it that MAGA is able to recruit massive numbers of people who put into Congress and into the White House the politicians that are actually going to make their material conditions worse?
My sense of this is that what they have been able to do by weaponizing race is to create the impression that welfare is about people of color, that Medicaid is about it's like they've turned it into a color code, not a social service. So therefore, even if they're on Medicaid, even if they're on SNAP, because we have now so racialized policy, they are under the impression that it's those black people. It's those, I mean, people keep still talking about the undocumented immigrants that are sucking off the government teeth for health care, which is totally untrue, completely untrue. But it feeds into a narrative that then means, therefore, you can embrace those people, even though you are on those programs. It never translates that this is about you. It's always about them. And that's the part that makes me completely flabbergasted, is that when you cut SNAP benefits and you lose SNAP benefits, you're still seeing it as a color issue, not as a need issue, Jonathan.
So then, I guess to ask the question again.
All right.
So
I'm not
we,
following you.
no, you are following.
Okay,
This
okay.
is race class.
Yes, yes.
This is a very public,
Yeah.
uh,
Conversation.
conversation. So when we think about, and because again, part of our goal is just to better understand how this phenomenon that we call race or racism, how it operates in different ways that shape society. And right now, the federal government, every branch of the federal government is governed by interests that want to crush all Americans. They want
Yes.
to ensure
Right.
that everyone lives with such precarity that people are forced into jobs that exploit them and cannot access housing, so that they are forced into housing conditions that exploit them, can't get health care, and so that they are in perpetual debt. This is contrary to the interests of the 90% of people who live in this country. And so then it is, okay, so how is it that you have, such a large percentage of the country that is nonetheless aligned with a set of interests who are, the whole game is about ensuring perpetual debt and precarity so that people can be exploited. And so then if we say, okay, so the Trump administration, is really over the top in its anti-blackness and it's anti-immigrant xenophobia, it's anti-LGBTQ bigotry. And part of the story, which I think is the story that is a little bit more obvious, is that this is about re-entrenching racial hierarchy. It's
Of
about
course.
re it's about sort of renormalizing, renaturalizing a certain sort of, common sense patriarchy, where, as a function of gender, people, are slotted into particular roles. Some in the home, others, in public domain, leading the world. And so part of it is about, this is the more obvious piece, about naturalizing, the repression, the oppression of historically, excuse me, subordinated groups. But it's also about enabling the oppression of, and this is just going back to what you said before. And so now my windup went too long. So racism that demonizes Black people and immigrants is in part meant to demonize Black people and immigrants.
Of
But it
course.
is also part of a political strategy that is designed to enable the oppression of
Poor people.
poor
People.
people, more specifically.
Poor white people, but is that where you want me to go?
So
I mean,
I mean,
I mean, I
but
mean, what I'm trying to say, I mean, like, this is the part that makes me crazy is that it is a story of class, but they don't want to talk about class, so they use race as cover for class, and therefore, if you assume all the misconnections that the reason why you are poor is because of the black and the Hispanic and the other and the women, the reason you don't have the job is that because a woman has that job. You should have had that job. Think about all those things. That to me is they've been able to morph all these conversations about what they're doing because in the end, they're not doing it because of any of those things. But what they're doing is they're to some extent criminalizing poverty and yet no one acknowledges that because they've been able to color code it by using the terms of race.
and so then what is so for MAGA and the corporate interests that benefit from a MAGA project? Because one of the stories of you talk about this a lot in your show is the massive grift,
Yeah.
the funneling of resources, of dollars, of public money into private hands. So a different way to ask the question, like, why was the summer of 2020 such an existential threat to the folks of the Heritage Foundation and to ALEC and to Koch brothers?
George
What?
Floyd.
Yeah, so George, and so, or I guess a different way to put it is,
Because we got to see the horror of the behavior and it wasn't something that you could hide. It wasn't something that you couldn't acknowledge that this guy was putting his knee on this black guy's, killing him in front of all of us. And in the end, you could not avert your eyes. You had
and
to
so let
see
me,
what you saw, and that the power was in what you saw, and an inability to explain it away, except for a white cop and a black guy.
and so, what is the key to getting out of this mess for the large majority of Americans whose lives are dictated by need to hustle because they're in debt and because they don't have access to public services, whether it's healthcare, like what is the from, is it
You're saying education because in the end, if you know the facts, if you're confronted with the facts, if you see the reality, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why we see what's happening with vouchers about the resegregation of public education, what we're seeing happening at higher ed. So the reason why you whitewash is therefore you're never having to confront those things. And if you don't have to confront those things, then you're more malleable.
and whose interests will we better appreciate are aligned if if the public has access to not just information about racial inequality, but to understand how race is deployed strategically, politically.
Well, but Jonathan, we started the show by talking about what the US is doing by saying countries with diversity policies are infringing human rights. So they're taking our behavior and now they're superimposing it on the world and basically telling the world, you must behave like us. So what is that? Is that so they're looking for an echo chamber? Is this how they reinforce their bad behavior? I mean, it's just, I mean, how do you do that in Africa? I mean, it's a little hard. But
Well,
I'm looking at where we started and I'm looking at where we are now. And I am looking at this, and it's not just what they are doing to us through policy, through vouchers, through resegregation. It's that they want to impose it on the world. And I don't know how that works.
so I think part of that is a question about just U.S. empire.
Yeah.
Um, and, this broader global authoritarian movement that the Trump administration is a part of. But I guess to bring us back, and I'm also, throughout the conversation implicitly invoking W.B. Du Bois,
Yeah.
who talks about the quote unquote psychological wages of whiteness to explain why it is that Southern elite are able to um, crack, divide folks who would I racially identify as, white or black by essentially, through public discourse, through other dynamics, create a psychological benefit in whiteness. And so part of that lesson is that race is deployed not just to create a hierarchy of sorts that places folks racialized as black on the bottom, but to prevent the cross-racial solidarity that's necessary in order to actually create the conditions for everyone to thrive. And in a sense, we're not far removed from that right now because what it is that MAGA provides is whiteness.
Yeah.
And so to think that one can actually meaningfully contend with that without actually taking race head on is hard. It's hard to imagine because imagine if, like if folks were just forced to say, you know what, you intuitively blame, immigrants, people of color, women for, you know, all the precarity that you face. If you take that out of the equation, it's like, all right, well, what is the actual cause of, all the challenges that you face in your life?
Right.
And who are the folks that share those interests with you? Turns out that it's everyone that you are pointing your finger at is
Exactly.
someone that if you work together with, you'd actually be able to realize an existence in which you weren't crushed.
So as you were talking, and I'm going back to what the new U.S. rules say countries with diversity policies are infringing on human rights, but they actually included in that abortion and facilitating mass migration. Okay, that's part of the gestalt, the three-legged stool.
Yeah.
So, Jonathan, as I'm thinking about this sort of urgency to racialize everything with this administration, to whitewash everything, do you think it also has something to do with the climate crisis? Because mass migration is going to be a norm. And it's going to be a norm because all of a sudden now you're going to see areas of drought. You're going to see areas of rain. You're going to see all these things. And they know that it's coming. And where they think most of it's going to be coming is maybe coming from places, for example, if we're talking about our hemisphere, it's going to be coming from Latin America. So therefore, by marginalizing before it even happens, and we keep talking about the border, you are creating the idea of the hierarchy that this is our space, not yours, that you may need to think that you need to come here because of what's happening as a result of the climate crisis, but they're actually building this sort of psychological wall around the US where we are the preferred class, we are the preferred race, and therefore, even though, because again, they included mass migration in this policy. And as I'm thinking about that, it goes back to something that we are in denial of, at least that the administration is, which is the climate crisis. And therefore, it's important for us to otherize as many people as possible in order to maintain our status and build that wall around us.
So actually, I'm going to take us a slightly different direction for the last 30 seconds.
Okay,
In part because
I'm sorry.
no, no, no. I mean, it's a good question. I'm, not really sure how to um, pack a meaningful response into the last 60 seconds, but just sort of this theme of understanding um, race as, among other things, a political tool to crack coalitions to divide communities.
Yes, absolutely.
Some like another, and we see this sort of different manifestations of this over the arc of US history. And one of the ones that we have been contending with acutely for the past 2 years, that Democrats continue to show no ability to meaningfully um, rebuff, is the misuse of Jewish identity and spurious accusations of anti-Semitism in order to drive authoritarian style politics into blue states
Mm.
and, quote unquote liberal institutions. And this is really dangerous in part because it is um, has been such an effective tool to prevent coalitions on the left from being able to push back against efforts on the right to control classrooms and to narrow what is taught so that students are less well positioned to be able to just, share the common sense notion that the world is unjust and we must take steps in order to uh, remedy it. And,
And the
I
world
know.
is unjust is how I need to end this conversation, but that's why we're here, is to make sure that they understand that. And that's how you fight it. This, everyone, is Race Class with Jonathan Feingold. We've been doing this now for a couple of years, and I want to remind everyone that it is our approach to race and racism because we're taking it at a point of curiosity and history rather than fear and anxiety. Thank you so much for doing this, Professor Feingold.
Thanks, Arnie.